peanut butter and jelly, milk and cookies, knife and fork. Some things just pair well together. And so does purchasing a custom below-the-hook lifting device with your upcoming overhead crane build. Why? Today, we're gonna find out. In this video, we're going to look at the pros and cons of purchasing a lifting device with your overhead crane. My name is Ben, and this is the Lifting and Rigging channel. I'm joined today by below-the-hook specialist, Dan Sherwood, and overhead crane specialist, Chris Whitney, a dynamite duo the likes of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon just with less hair, Woody and Buzz, Jordan and Pippin. Before we get started on talking about why you should consider buying a below-the-hook device with your overhead crane build, Dan, you just want to briefly explain what is a below-the-hook device?
Below-the-hook device is any type of engineered lifting apparatus, we'll call it, that attaches to an overhead crane that is designed to pick up either a specific load or a variety of loads.
Sounds expensive. Overhead crane's expensive. What's the argument for buying both of these very expensive objects together?
If you're investing that much money into an overhead crane to start making these lifts, you want to make sure from top to bottom, you're safe, you have the right way to do it, you're not going to damage your load. I recommend you always review that application and see if it makes sense to go with a custom engineered lifting device, always.
When a company buys an overhead crane, what is one of the first things that they should consider with how they're actually handling their loads?
When they're trying to design a system to lift a particular load, let's say a 5-ton load, you want to make sure that you also take into account what is being used to lift the load, be it chains or wire rope slings or a custom below-the-hook device. You need to consider the weight of that equipment as well as the dead load that you're lifting when designing the crane itself, as well as the support structure that's supporting the entire lift. Another consideration there too would be also the bail on the lifter. A lot of times somebody will purchase a crane, it may not be from us, from somebody else. They'll come to us for a lifter, and then we find out that the hook can't accommodate a bail.
So what are some of the issues that a customer might face when trying to decide if specialized lifting equipment is needed, or if they can just stick with traditional rigging equipment like slings, shackles, hooks, things like that?
Let's just use a very basic example. If they're picking up a scrap hopper and that scrap hopper has 4 lugs on it, that's a very simple application for the crane. Now, if we need to pick up an engine, manipulate that engine a little bit to put it into the car, or just move it from a position to another position, and we're grabbing something that doesn't necessarily lend itself to be easily rigged up with slings, it doesn't have dedicated lift points on it already, that's really when you want to start looking into a custom device. Or if it's so big and your center of gravity is going to be off balance if you can only pick it from a central point and you don't have a good point to pick it, again, that's where we want to start looking into, all right, what can I do to make this lift safer?
What about future-proofing your crane? Maybe they say, we don't need a below-the-hook device, we've always done it this way.
What you need to consider is down the road, if you're going to be putting in a device, is that device going to need air? Is it going to need electric? Similar to this hoist here, it has electric provisions for it, because going back and doing that in the field is a lot more expensive than doing it in the shop when the crane's being built on the floor.
And I think you always have that conversation with the customer. Looking forward, do you think this is going to be the heaviest piece you guys could ever handle? A lot of times customers have that understanding and they say, no, we might go bigger. It's only going to cost X amount of more to go from 5-ton hoist to a 7.5-ton hoist. And then you're buffered in for any future weight, any future lifting device that may go on it. You're building that in now, as opposed to designing a full system for 5-ton and then 5 years later being like, oh, I need to upgrade this to 7.5-ton or a 10-ton.
Any examples that you have of times when customers bought a new overhead crane, realized that they needed custom below-the-hook device, and then kind of regretted not doing it all together?
Absolutely. I could think of one where we talked about an application, customers lifting plate, putting it onto a plasma cutter. Their plan was to use chains with plate hooks. Once they got going, they realized, okay, this is going to take 2 to 3 people to do this job, get everything hooked up and make sure it's done properly. They got down the road and they're thinking to themselves, man, I really wish we had done a BTH device. Then they decided, hey, we want to make this a one-man operation. Okay, you can do that, but you need an electric plate lifter for that. They also didn't take into account that that lifter is going to weigh a lot more than chains were going to weigh. So now the crane wasn't adequate. And again, they were looking more on the price side of things than they were about the feasibility of of doing the application with one person, and they had to go back to the drawing board down the road.
I've been part of ones, for example, a new kind of mill edition. Chris and I were a part of a big one where they were putting in a big roll mill and they didn't take into account how they're going to change any of the rolls, what they're going to have to do for that. And we went in and we had to quote upgrading the hoists to account for the lifting devices and trying to figure out how the lifting devices were going to get in there for that.
So we talked about a lot of pros. What are the cons?
The biggest hesitation is just the price. If you're making this big investment already into an overhead crane, additional funds for a custom device is, it could put you over where your budget is.
Well, let's say you already have a device that you've been using and you've got decent life left in it. Is it better to buy a new one at the time, or you say, hey, can we design this crane to work with this device that we already have?
The thing you need to look at is what's the service been like with that piece. As it gets older, things start to break down. As a specialist, it's our job to talk with the customer about that on the front end. And here's our option for you to consider. And again, you may not want to or need it right now, but you at least have an idea of what the replacement cost is going to be.
And a lot of times if a customer has a existing device already, it's kind of changing the whole dynamic of the crane approach to maybe being a brand new application they're putting a crane in for, to they're expanding their operation, or they're maybe just adding a second crane onto an existing runway, and they already have a lifting device to go with it. So that in conversation is going to get brought up, on the crane side. All right, we have a device already. We don't need a new device. Or, hey, we have a device already. We want to just duplicate this device because it works in this bay and we just want to move the same application to that bay.
If you're buying an overhead crane and a below the hook device together, is there any discounts or cost savings that are available to you?
So I'll use a car analogy. Let's say you're ordering a brand new car and you're putting your additions on. If you order it from the factory with a heated steering wheel, it might be $250. But if you get the car delivered and you decide, 5 months down the road, you want that heated steering wheel, and you take it back to the dealership, remove your old steering wheel, put the new steering wheel on. So you're paying $400 when you could have paid $250 because you have additional labor and parts and everything to put into the car. Just like, pairing a below the hook device with the crane, if there's modifications that need to be made to the crane side when you're putting the below the hook device in, it's always going to be cheaper to do that at the factory. While you may not see a discount line, on a quote, there's kind of hidden costs, I think you could say, that you're saving on as opposed to if you do it separately.
I think the shop integration versus field integration is key. The only other thing I could think of would be some sort of bulk discounting. If you're getting 5 cranes on a runway, each one's going to have a lifter. There is an advantage to bulk buy.
So what's the advantage of working with Mazzella on this one?
We have everything under one roof. We've got the expertise and the engineering to look at the crane system and the BTH system, integrate it all in-house rather than try to piecemeal it.
We can troubleshoot it all. We can make sure, if we have electrical going, that everything's matching there. We can already integrate the lifting device into controls. We can make sure bale sizes match, double check our lifter weight and hoist capacities and how we're pulling it or how it's going to be loaded is all well and fine, and take care of that before any steel or anything gets delivered or put up in the facility. So we're not trying to backtrack, have to, rebrace runways or anything for weird loadings or additional weight or anything like that.
I think piggybacking off of that too, with the integration standpoint, we can test all that stuff before it ships. Mm-hmm. That way, when it gets out to the field, it's already ready to go, and it's less troubleshooting out there. We've already taken care of all that here in-house before it went out. We've got engineers on both sides of the crane and the BTH business. We've got specialists that are very well versed in their fields.
We can consult with each other as we're designing the projects in tandem, making sure we have all the information as to what the crane's going to be and our below the hook device, so the engineers can merge those two into the same file together, make sure everything's matching up as far as, if we know what the customer's load is, we can add that into the CAD file and just make sure everything's going to fit, everything's going to work the way it's designed to work.
Other biggest thing is everything can be integrated into one proposal. You're not having to go to one company for a crane, and go to another company for the below the hook device.
So would you guys say you have more of a Batman-Robin relationship or Burton-Ernie?
It's Crane Man and BTH boy, baby.
It is. Powers unite. When you get the pair of us coming on site, it's because it's a very good application that we want to make sure is handled to the best of our ability.
Hopefully this video helped you weigh the pros and cons of buying both your crane and lifting device together. Some things are just meant to go as a pair, like coffee and donuts, salt and pepper, or Mario and Luigi. If you found this video useful, informative, entertaining, or you just feel like being friendly, then hit that like button so we can get this information out to everyone who needs it. Remember, safe rigging is smart rigging. My name is Ben. Stay safe out there.